In my previous video, I selected my England forward pack for the Rugby World Cup in France later this year. Now in today's video, I'm going to be selecting my backline to accompany the forwards to go as far as possible in the Rugby World Cup. Now just to clarify, this is not the team I think Steve Borthwick will select on the 7th of August when he names his formal announcement of his team, but rather the team that I think gives England the best chance to go as far as possible. Now I've tried to blend the youthful exuberance of informed players in the Gallagher Premiership with some experience, with some players that have been there and done it and have that elite level test match experience of the winning end and the losing end. I believe that blend is really important to make the right decisions in test matches, but also have the star factor that is needed to win a World Cup. Now I'm going to start off with the scrum halves and work my way through the team. Here we have Alex Mitchell and Ben Youngs. Now Alex Mitchell, I believe, is the informed scrum half in England. He's had a stellar season for Northampton Saints. He's held a leadership role within that team and has been one of the main driving forces that got them into that 4th place and got them into the semi-finals of the Gallagher Premiership. Alongside him we have Ben Youngs, England's most capped player of all time. Ben Youngs has, I believe, faded over the years in terms of his form and particularly his speed around the breakdown. And I believe that's something that Alex Mitchell really does have. It's one of his X factor elements to his game, his speed, his tap and goes, just that electricness around the breakdown. I believe these two scrum halves should go to the World Cup because they complement each other. Now, you could easily pick Jack Van Portfleet and Ben Youngs, which is most likely what Steve Borthwick will select, but I believe you need two scrum halves that complement each other. In 2016, when England were on their big run with Eddie Jones of successful 18 games unbeaten streak, they had Ben Youngs and Danny Care. These two players complemented each other really well. You'd bring Danny Care on in the end of the game to snipe around the fringes and be real trouble for the tiring defences. And I believe a similar method could be used here. You start Ben Youngs, and the only other player in the England squad that plays the same mould as Ben Youngs is Jack Van Portfleet. And now Jack Van Portfleet is a very good player in his own right, but picking Jack Van Portfleet and Alex Mitchell, I believe, is too inexperienced to manage the team in the Rugby World Cup. So I've gone with Ben Youngs for the starter. I don't believe he's the best 9 in England. I don't believe he's really in the top 2. But in terms of what I believe gives us the best chance, Ben Youngs starts and then Alex Mitchell can come off the bench and really add some speed to the breakdown. Now fly halves, I've gone for 2 once again. Now Owen Farrell is likely to go as the England captain, and Marcus Smith, who's entered a really good line of form for Harlequins but has had some trouble translating that onto the international stage. Now I believe Farrell is a fly half and not an inside centre. I think we've realised over the last couple of years that system simply doesn't work anymore. So I'd start Owen Farrell, and then Marcus Smith is that player that can come off the bench and really rip teams apart with his footwork, his goose steps. But I do believe Smith lacks a little bit of test match control, and especially defensively, he's not the most physical. Now moving on to the centres, we have Manu Tuilagi, Henry Slade, Ollie Lawrence and Joe Marchant. Now let's work through these chronologically. I believe Manu Tuilagi has entered a real rich vein of form in the end of the Gallagher Premiership season, with good performances in the semi-final against Leicester and then in the final against Saracens. Although unsuccessful, Sale gave Saracens a real run for their money, and one of the main reasons behind that was Manu Tuilagi. He's not the most diverse, tricky player. He just does one thing and he does it very well. He picks that ball up and he runs it as hard as he can and ties in defenders and leaves space for other outside backs. And I believe in this Rugby World Cup, if you're going to be successful, you have to have an inside centre that can get you over that gain line. You see it with Ireland, with either Robbie Henshaw or Bundy Aki. You see it with South Africa, with Esther Hazen or Diolende. You really do need a bit of punch in that back line, because if you don't have the punch in the back line, teams will simply drift off and you'll cut down space for your other attackers. Now moving on to Henry Slade. Henry Slade is a player that hasn't really played consistently for England recently, but I believe the combination of Manu Tuilagi and Henry Slade is the sort of experience you do need in a Rugby World Cup. Ollie Lawrence being relatively inexperienced but does have the X factor, and obviously being the Gallagher Premiership Player of the Season does bring his own merit to the team. Henry Slade, I believe out of the 4 centres going to the World Cup, is probably the weakest of the 4 centres. Not in terms of what he's done in his career, because he's had an amazing career, but in terms of form at the moment, I don't believe he's in form. But I believe on his day, with that additional left-footed kick, it does add a different option to the back line. If we look at these centres, other than Slade, not many of them can kick. Now, kicking is a brilliant asset to have as a rugby player, especially outside of your flyer halves. Having a centre, it adds an element of unpredictability to their game, because if you Manu Tuolangi's running at you, you know he's not going to chip you. You know he's just going to run as hard as possible. So I believe it does bring a slight different angle. Ollie Lawrence, a player that's entered great form. His ability to hand off and get those offloads away is something we've seen throughout the Gallagher Premiership. He's not quite translated that offloading game to the international stage, but he does, similar to Manu Tuolangi, add that little bit of punch up the midfield, and especially against Wales in the Six Nations, he really shone. Joe Marchant, a very versatile player who can then come into the back 3 and cover on the wings. He's a player that I believe for Harlequins is essential to their success. He's leaving Harlequins at the end of the season, which is a big blow for Quins, but he does add an element of pace to the back line. Out of all those players, he's most likely the fastest, and does add an element, especially with those crossfield kicks. He really does partner up well with Marcus Smith with the crossfield kicks. He's very good aerially, so that is an element to his game that I believe does get him in the World Cup squad. Moving on to the back 3, we have the in-form Caden Murley. Now, I believe a winger is a position in which you can rotate very easily without disrupting the team's strategies, ethos and style of play. Wingers don't particularly need to be that experienced. I think wingers is, of all positions, the place and the position that you pick on form, and there's no other in-form winger like Caden Murley at the moment. His finishing ability is just second to none. I believe he's the top try scorer in the Gallagher Premiership, or maybe joint top scorer with Mateo Carreras of Newcastle. But yeah, he's in a rich vein of form, and he does add that punch on the wing, the physicality, defensively also, to really beat defenders one-on-one. The player missing out on the back 3 is Johnny May. Now, at the moment, I believe Caden Murley's actually been dropped from the England Rugby training squad, with Johnny May left amongst the players to be selected. Now, this is a decision which I really don't understand, as Johnny May has not been in good form for Gloucester. I don't believe he's even a top 5 winger in England. So yeah, that is disappointing, but I'd definitely take Caden Murley. Alongside Caden Murley, the next player I will take is Joe Thokanasiga. Now, Joe Thokanasiga is one of those unique players that adds a different edge to his game, a different element that you don't usually see from a winger. He's well over 6'3", 6'4", I believe. Very physical, 110 kilos plus, and does add a different edge to the attack. He can be used in many different ways. One-on-one on the wing, he's exceptional. He can really beat players, free his arms up, offload. He's the full package in terms of attacking abilities. It does lack a little bit in terms of raw pace, and defensively can be a little bit flat-footed. But I do think he's definitely worth taking to France, just because of what extra he does bring. Next, we have Elliot Daly. Daly returned from injury this season for Saracens, and although he didn't have a great performance in the Gallagher Premiership final, when he conceded a try pretty much via a defensive error, and then went into touch and got a try disallowed, but along the season he showed his attacking abilities, the ability to create space for other attacking players. And Daly, he can really play in the centres or the back 3, so he's one of those players that is very valuable to a team, especially when you're restricted for numbers. Yeah, he can play in many different positions. Also, just like Slade, out of all of the backs, backline, back 3, he does have a very good left boot. He's very good at exit kicking, and does add the option for a long range shot at goal if England really needed it. Freddie Stewart, probably the best English player in the Six Nations. Got man of the match, I believe, against Wales. He caught everything under the sun. Brilliant aerially. But against South Africa last year, he did show his vulnerabilities in defence. If he's one-on-one with a quick winger, he's subject to being stepped, especially like wingers like Kurtley, Arendse. Yeah, he has shown his vulnerabilities there. but definitely taking him to the World Cup, and especially in attack when you're close to the line, he's like an extra second row with the power of a forward. Next, Anthony Watson, a player that really stood up in the Six Nations game versus Ireland last year. When Freddie Stewart got red carded, he really did step up and showed his value to the team. His footwork is second to none, probably the best in the whole squad, and can beat a defender with ease. He's not in the same form he was in 2019 with injury problems restricting his game time for Leicester, but he's definitely a player with a good level of experience that can play on the wing or at fullback. That should definitely go to the World Cup. Now finally, we have Max Malins, a player who struggled to find his best position for a long time at Saracens, playing fly half, winger, fullback, and finally has sort of settled in to being a winger. Malins has been exceptional for Saracens. I believe he's Saracens' top try scorer or thereabouts, competing with Ben Earl. But his finishing ability in the Gallagher Premiership has been incredible, but he does lack the extra sort of edge of pace in the international scene. He's not the quickest of wingers, but aerially he does make up for that. In the air, he's probably not quite on the level of Freddie Stewart, but in terms of competing for high balls, he's definitely a solid shout, having played at fullback, sort of learnt those skills of the players around him. Defensively, Malins is a little bit of a liability. We saw Caden Murley when Saracens played at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in their London derby. Caden Murley took liberties with Max Malins, defensively picked Malins up, dumped him on his back, and with the return, when Caden Murley was running at Max Malins, Malins would look defensively really vulnerable, and Caden Murley ran over him, I think it was at least twice. So that is definitely a weakness to Max Malins' game. Now this is my full England Rugby World Cup squad to go to the World Cup. Let me know what you think of it, especially the back line. Very mixed in terms of form and experience. Potentially taking 6 back 3 is a little bit excessive. Maybe we do need an extra scrum half, maybe a Danny Kerr or a George Ford, but you have to make cuts at some point, and you can't take all the players you want to. So yeah, let me know what you think of my full England Rugby World Cup squad ahead of Steve Borthwick's formal announcement on the 7th of August. And if you did enjoy the video, please do drop a like. Thank you very much.